Welcome to the Work Trends Podcast, brought to you by Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. Every week, I interview smart people reimagining the world of work. Be sure to stay current with all of our interesting podcasts by visiting our page at Talent Culture Work Trends on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And of course, you can listen at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends Podcast, sponsored by SAP SuccessFactors. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. As the talent culture community knows, skills have evolved from a buzzword to a game changer in the fast-paced world of HR. Over the past 5 years, researchers at SAP SuccessFactors have conducted extensive research and found that a skills-based approach is far more than a trend, it's a necessity. You will hear 4 key approaches to making skills a reality in your organization. Explore a new framework who's going to guide you and learn about the latest technologies that support skills integration. But before we jump into today's podcast, go ahead and ask yourself these 2 questions. Number 1, do you know what a skills-based approach actually means? And number 2, do you have the tools and strategies to effectively gather skills data and put it to use? Let's jump in. Joining us today is Dr. Lauren Park from SAP SuccessFactors. Dr. Lauren Park is a senior HR research scientist on the SAP SuccessFactors Market Insights and Customer Engagement team. She leads applied mixed method research programs on HR and workforce topics to inform product and portfolio strategy and provide consultative guidance to organizations around the world. We are so excited you are here with us today, Lauren. How are you doing?
I am doing well. So excited to be chatting with you today, Megan. And I'm dialing in from my home in the Bay Area, enjoying a sunny day, but kind of the first day of where it really feels like fall. So looking forward to that too.
Oh my gosh. A sunny day in the Bay is quite a special thing.
It really is.
Well, listen, let's just dive in because I know we've got a lot to cover today. So we are going to talk about skills today. Let's begin by having you define what skills our listeners should be considering during our conversation. Let's also differentiate between skills and education or job experience. Can you get into that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked, because when we talk about things like skills-based practices or skills-based organizations, it's really important to set that foundation of what we're talking about when we say skills, especially as we compare it to what we've traditionally used, like education and job experience. So for the purposes of, our research and kind of what we consider skills as a research team, we're really looking at an umbrella term there for knowledge, skills, and abilities. And these are the, perhaps the traits, the concrete skills, the knowledge that employees have that they can apply on the job. We also differentiate between technical and professional skills or knowledge. So what some folks would call soft skills or hard skills, we prefer to call them professional and technical, respectively. And when we think about the difference between these skills, a very objective and measurable way of assessing whether an employee can or can't perform a job, the difference between those and things like education or job experience, I'd like to think about as a really high level of inference, where we have, observing an employee perform a job or completing a validated, measurable skills assessment on one end. And on the other hand, we have what I kind of call skills artifacts, things like education or previous job titles, where we might be able to guess what an employee's skills are from these, and we might be correct, but there's that level of inference, that level of implication in between those two that I really think so many organizations are trying to close by looking at more objective types of skills data instead of those traditional criteria like education or job experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, skills is such a broad word, but HR skills are unique and they're ever changing. It's really fun to look at what this term means today and what our listeners should know to embrace a skills based organization. Please tell us about the Winning the Race for Skills research program. How did it come about and what was specifically studied?
Yeah, so this was a really great research program we've done over the past couple of years. And the focus was on specifically skills-based hiring and pay. We had, as a team, done a lot of work on topics like skills-based learning or skills-based career development. But from what we've seen around skills-based organizations, we really see this transition to becoming a skills-based organization, starting with hiring and ending with pay. So we wanted to study those two specific practices, of course, in part because they're very important right now. We're seeing a lot of discussion around hiring processes and compensation decisions, but we really wanted to look at that kind of bookend of an organization's journey to becoming more skills-based. So the goal was to look at what do these skills-based practices mean and look like in practice today? What are the anticipated outcomes of adopting skills-based practices like these? And what are the barriers that are prohibiting organizations from maximizing the potential of these practices? So we looked at this with about 50 talent acquisition and talent management leaders across regions and industries, all from SAP SuccessFactors customer organizations. And then we also collected survey data from managers and individual contributors, also across regions and industries, to understand this from the organization's perspective, but also from the manager, employee, and candidate perspective as well.
And this was a multi-year study, no?
Yes, it was. It was.
That is fantastic. I mean, and I believe it was 5 years. A 5-year study is no small feat. Think of how the world has changed so much in that time frame. I think it's absolutely incredible to have this kind of depth of research to explore what the marketplace really needs regarding HR skills and how to effectively apply them in the workplace. So, tell us, what research findings do you think are most surprising or informative that leaders can apply in their journeys to become more skills-based?
Yeah, when I think about what we've looked at related to skills-based pay and skills-based hiring, there's two things that immediately come to mind. And the first is this idea around change management, which is always, a topic that we discuss as HR and people leaders, but we found some really unique change management principles and, results with implications for change management in our research. The biggest thing and the most surprising thing was around candidate change management. Now, we talked to our HR leaders, we surveyed all of these different personas to ask, what are your opinions of skills-based hiring and skills-based practices? And understandably, recruiters have to change the way they work. Hiring managers have to change the way they make decisions about hiring. Senior leaders may have their decisions challenged more often than they're used to. So all of these personas, have a lot of change that needs to happen. But specifically with candidates, we actually found this really fascinating insight where candidates who have less education and who are less likely to be a perfect skills match for a role are actually less likely to see the benefit of skills-based hiring for them, which leads to them being further less likely to apply for roles. So when we think about skills-based hiring and skills-based practices more broadly, a lot of the reasons organizations are doing this are to bring people like that into the organization and give them opportunities. We understand that the achievement of a 4-year degree, for example, is not always the best marker of what an employee or a candidate could be capable of. And so by implementing skills-based practices, we can bring candidates into the organization who have those skills, but maybe not access to a 4-year college degree. Our data, though, show that these candidates maybe just aren't buying the idea idea that this type of practice can be helpful for them. So when we think about the internal change management that needs to happen with all of those personas that I mentioned, we really also need to be thinking about skills-based hiring as part of an employer brand and how we're managing this change for candidates, really targeting our recruitment methods, communicating the intentions of skills-based hiring to make sure that we are capturing the excitement and the interest of the candidates that we're really hoping to serve with these types of practices.
I really enjoy hearing your answer to this question. It's so interesting because the best research is able to change our paradigm, right? Research like this reveals the truth versus what we see in front of us or what we think we know. It also, I think, provides us direction about how to map out a plan to improve. So thank you so much for sharing. Fascinating stuff. Please tell us in a nutshell about these 4 strategies: skills implied, skills included, skills led, and skills based. How are they different, and how is work organized in these situations?
Yeah, so this is something that we're really excited about to be able to put forward. And this is really where those 5 years of data, those 6 individual research programs all come together to be very actionable and hopefully helpful for organizations. I'll give a little bit of background on this framework also, because I think it's important to understand how we arrived here. As part of this research, we had a maybe hypothesis that when we look at the parts of a decision, a people-related decision that are made, we expected that a lot of organizations are going to want to move entirely to a skills-based decision-making model where we're no longer looking at those traditional criteria I mentioned, but what we're really looking at is just skills data. That is what a lot of organizational leaders are talking about. That's what a lot of media sources are talking about, is this fully skills-based model. But the reality is, for the organizations that we spoke with, is that half of leaders don't intend to make that entire replacement. There's a variety of reasons for this. I mean, there are legal and compliance implications. There's the belief that more data points are going to be better. There's the belief that if we include skills data, and we're not getting any additional value from what we used to look at, we can just stop looking at that, right? So that hypothesis of moving to an entirely skills-based model of decision-making was really turned on its head. And what we wanted to do then is understand, okay, if skills aren't going to be the entire basis for decision-making, what does it look like to include skills in a way that is still meaningful, is still useful, still allows organizations to realize the benefits of a skills-based decision, while also acknowledging the many different realities that prevent them from becoming fully skills-based. And so where we landed was this framework and those 4 strategies that you mentioned, where we have on kind of, one side, this skills implied organization, which is kind of, as I was, talking about earlier, this level of inference or this level of implication between objective skills data and skills information and the artifacts that we look at. With skills implied organizations, we're really relying on those artifacts to tell us what we need about a candidate's or an employee's skills. We then, instead of becoming, entirely skills-based from there, which many organizations aren't going to do, we see something like skills included, which is where we're connecting jobs to, often just a few skills. These are primarily technical, and we're really making decisions primarily on traditional criteria, but supplemented by limited skills evaluation. In the context of skills-based pay, we might say something like, the base salary, the base pay of our employees is dictated by their hierarchy in the organization or their function in the organization, but perhaps their bonuses are actually based on skills and skills data. So that is one model that we actually saw employees employees and managers feeling very positively about, but would be considered more skills included as opposed to moving entirely to skills-based pay.
Yeah. And I mean, anytime we see traction where we're seeing a positive result, I'm with you. Like, we've all got to get real on this and follow the data, because that is truly what's going to set us to raise this bar, right? So I want to get into skills data for just a minute. How can we use technology to gather skills data to support skills integration and make better organizational decisions?
Yeah, this was a really interesting piece of the research because we're in a great era right now, as you can probably imagine, with all of the advances in artificial intelligence. I mean, I personally can't go through a conversation with someone without AI being brought up. But the reason for this and the reason that this is so important right now is because, AI, the possibilities for AI in allowing us to build skills architectures, in measuring skills, in using skills data are nearly endless. I mean, we have the ability for generative AI to look at an organization's structure, look at all of their documents, and develop a skills architecture that can be flexible and adaptable to the organization's needs. We have the ability for AI to identify types of skills assessments that are going to be best for which types of roles, perhaps even develop those skills assessments. And then, of course, using that data and things like matching candidates to roles. But what I'm most excited about seeing, and I'm really hoping to see a lot of maturity come in this space, is the idea that we can use all of this rich skills data to continue to feed those models and just improve the skills-based hiring process over and over again. So things like using data to translate between an internal language that a company has about skills and what those skills are called in the external market. That's an area where AI can play a really huge role. And using data to, as I mentioned, create skills tests or skills-based interview questions from job descriptions, really improving skills measurement and making this more evidence-based. So a lot of really exciting advances going on in this space. And I think with this, the possibilities for organizations, even if they're not moving to an entirely skills-based model, the possibilities are just so much more accessible than they have been in the past.
This is a giant piece of the puzzle, isn't it? We have the tools available to effectively measure skills, but we need to understand how to effectively use this information. And it's so important. And clearly, this is an area where SAP SuccessFactors shines. So, Dr. Lauren Park, I want to thank you for stopping by today.
Thank you so much, Megan. It was a pleasure.
This was a mini masterclass in skills today. We are so grateful to have an expert like you sharing your findings, strategies, and explanations that can truly be game changers in how people's skills can be used to advance organizations everywhere. Here are a few of my takeaways. Number one, HR leaders want to use skills data across their people practices, but it takes knowledge and strategy to do so appropriately. Number two, it's important to know how to read, understand and apply skills data, and have a technology partner that can provide guidance. Number three, it's incredibly helpful to know the differences between skills implied, skills included, skills led, and skills based. Lauren, thanks again for joining us. It's been an extremely insightful conversation, and I have no doubt that our listeners were taking some furious notes. Good news, listeners, we are sharing this research with you so you can have it all on hand. Visit news.sap.com to access the Winning the Race for Skills research, as well as additional resources. And last but not least, the talent culture community wants to hear from you. I've got questions here, and you've got answers. Question number one, do you know how your organization functions? Skills implied, skills included, skills led, or skills based? Number 2, do you feel that you have a comprehensive skills strategy for your team members? And number 3, what aha moment did you have about how to improve your application of people skills data? I want to hear from you. Visit us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram to share your responses to these questions, or feel free to give me a shout out at Megan M. Bureau on the socials or mbureau@talentculture.com. And as always, I'll do it again. As always, thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast. It's a place to find meaningful connections at work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share this podcast with your friends and your colleagues. Send us a question on the socials using the hashtag WorkTrends. See you soon. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Just a reminder that you can hear all the Work Trends podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the podcast page at talentculture.com. Be sure to subscribe so you can listen on the go and stay up to date on all the latest news you want to hear. I look forward to catching up with you next time. I hope today's information made you wiser, happier, more informed, and most importantly, thinking of how you can use it to improve the quality of your life.